Well, the final report is out on the engine failure from the Cessna C310R 101 Golf that happened after takeoff from North Las Vegas Airport. So let's see what the NTSB came up with. Stick with me on FlyWire. Hi, I'm Scott Perdue, and today on FlyWire, we're going to see what the NTSB came up with in the final report on that 310 engine failure accident in Las Vegas. If you remember, this was a charter flight with one passenger that took off of runway 12 right at North Las Vegas on October 29, 2020. Did a video on it way back when, and it was kind of surprising. The audio transmissions from the pilot didn't show any real concern that an engine had failed. Didn't even say it, didn't declare an emergency. But the ADSB revealed that the left engine had failed probably very soon after takeoff. But you couldn't tell from the pilot's demeanor or his requests. He requested VFR flight following to San Diego, and that's with the tower on ground, And when the pilot first talked at departure, seconds after takeoff, he merely asked to change his destination to Henderson Airport on the south side of Las Vegas. Well, the airplane never really accelerated very much. It didn't get above, it was very slow speed the whole time. The altitude didn't get very high, and it soon began decaying, followed by the airspeed as the 310 got closer and closer to the ground. He kept raising the nose, and that led to the VMC roll. My review of the witness cell phone video prompted me to call it that, a VMC roll. In other words, the pilot allowed the airspeed to decay to the point where he no longer had flight control authority to maintain level flight, and that rolled into the bad engine. It's an issue with twins. So let's watch some of the sharpened video that wasn't available during the first video. Let's watch some of that sharpened video that came from the docket. One quick word about the final report in the docket. All the facts, witness reports, test results, and anything else that pertains to the case is stored in the docket and available online at some point. They release it to the general public. Most of the time it's concurrent with the final report. Sometimes it's ahead of the final. Sometimes they do a factual as an interim report. I like to look at the docket and see if any of the reported facts change my working theory, and then compare it with the final report and see what the NTSB result was. So I want to see what they actually came up with and figure it out, and see what the NTSB had to say. I notice most folks are interested in the who, what, why, when, where, and how the engine failed. And from my perspective, that really is what really is the most interesting about a situation like this is what the pilot did after the engine failed. But in this case, I think that what the investigation found has impact on each of us. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that first. I think we need to know about it. I've seen it happen in other accidents. So the engine had 40 hours on it total since it was disassembled and reassembled due to low oil pressure. 10 months previously, this IO520 had experienced an alternator failure. And when that happens in these kind of Continentals, it spews little metal bits directly in the interior of the engine, everywhere. It makes a huge mess. And this engine was torn down and inspected, then reassembled with overhauled accessories. This was a prudent action. And when that happens, you might as well tear it down. The engine had just under 25 hours since the last oil change, and there were no comments in the logbooks about finding any metal in the oil filter. The cylinders were bore scoped, the plugs examined during the investigation, magnetos torn down, oil pump inspected, and no abnormalities were found in the accident investigation. The engine inspection did reveal that there were two rather large holes that are not normally there in the crankcase next to cylinder number 3 and 4. The number 2 connecting rod was separated. That's kind of a big clue. It's beginning to sound a little bit like oil starvation. And there was thermal damage on most of the main bearing journals, and the bearings were, and the bearings. Melted metal matching the Babbitt material, that's in the metal inside the bearings, was found that was filling various oil holes and other things. Bearings number 2 and 3 exhibited fretting, and that means they were moving back and forth and instead of being secure, and that's an issue. Number 2 bearing was displaced, and that to me is a really big red flag. The number 4 bearing displayed heavy rubbing, and its oil-through holes were filled with metal as well. All of this would block oil being introduced into these very hot areas, in particular that number 2 bearing that shifted, and that would lead directly to an overheat and engine failure in very short order. The investigation also found some of the bearing parts were a mix and match of Continental and Superior parts at the same, like this would be Continental and that would be Superior in the same bearing, and that's not how they were sold. As a mechanic, this disturbs me. Maybe it's not a problem, but I definitely don't like mixing different manufacturers' parts in a critical application like this. This may or may not have been a significant factor in this failure, but they didn't investigate it. I have seen several accidents where the cylinder hold-down nuts had not been properly torqued, in particular in the correct pattern to bring everything together, and that resulted in the case not being aligned correctly and then the bearing shifting. And when that happens, it covers up oil galleries and you don't get oil and bad things happen. The displaced number 2 bearing and the heavy rubbing and metal melting experienced by the number 4 bearing could be good indicators of this. However, there was no mention of checking torque values or any of that issue in the cylinder hold-down nuts during the disassembly. They made no mention of an investigation. The engine failed due to oil starvation, but the pilot was able to feather the propeller. The pilot was not on any medications, and the tox screen did not reveal any significant substances in his body. It did find elevated ethanol in the liver and the muscle tissue, but not the brain. And that is typical of traumatic deaths post-mortem and not ascribed to alcohol. So the NTSB probable cause of this accident was the National Transportation Safety Board determines the probable cause of this accident to be the pilot's failure to maintain the airplane's minimum controllable airspeed while maneuvering with one engine inoperative. Also causal was the loss of power in the left engine due to oil starvation, and contributing to the accident were inadequate maintenance that failed to correct an ongoing problem with the engine in the months preceding the accident. Indeed, the left engine was feathered. The right engine was producing quite a bit of power all the way to impact. The aircraft didn't experience a VMC roll. And frankly, that's not a stall so much as the right engine induced a rolling moment, so the left engine's failed. It's going to produce a rolling moment that could not be overcome by the application of flight controls. That's what I meant by he run out of flight control authority. He's too slow. He needs more airflow over the rudder and the ailerons. From one perspective, it looks like the 310 overflew power lines. From another, it shows he didn't even make it that far. One witness said he was banked 15 to 20 degrees into the right engine just prior to the roll, and this is way beyond the 5 degrees allowed in the certification and accepted by best practice and the design criteria for twins. In the first witness video, the bank angle was much shallower, and the slow airspeeds he was flying, it presented the worst possible case, situation for him. You need to maintain a speed of above VMC in order to have enough flight control authority to fly straight and level, and even that's a 5-degree bank. And that's non-slip. You're not slipping at all. If your wings are level, you're slipping. The ADS-B data shows that he never reached an adequate speed or altitude, and some of that was due to his attempt to fly around the Class B surface area on the way to Henderson. See the original video. The bottom line is the pilot did not manage his energy that he had available, and he just frankly didn't accept reality. And he had an agenda, and he was going to pursue that agenda. He didn't think about the issues. That brings me back to the probable cause. Nowhere in there was any mention of the poor decision-making of the pilot to avoid returning to the airport he just took off from. Less than a mile behind him, and it only involved right turns into the good engine. Nowhere was there a mention of skipping McCarran Airport. It was 8 miles away. As he turns, it would have been over here. This way went to right. McCarran's going to be over here. He didn't go there. Slight heading change would have had him on a straight into runway 19, and maneuvering would have been a minimum. Instead, he flew towards Henderson, nearly 15 miles away, where he had to go to avoid Class B surface area and then make several turns. He did crash, where the area where he did crash was not as dense as the city he flew over, and there were landing spots that he could have set the airplane down on, but I don't think that's a good thing in this situation. He had an airport to go to. There's a lot of speculation as to the reasons why the pilot chose this course of action. And I received a lot of inputs from viewers that watched my original video on this topic, but in truth, we'll never know, frankly. And I'm not sure it really matters. He did it, and he paid the ultimate price. Sorry if that seems callous, but I want to make sure you understand the point. Okay? One thing that I think is important to realize is the part the NTSB mentioned in their probable cause, and that is that a differential compression check had revealed that the cylinders were all barely over 60/80. The NTSB, citing FAA guidance about removing cylinders with less than 60 psi, was evidence of poor maintenance, which in their mind was proof of why the engine failed. We don't have to look any further. Poor maintenance, case closed, let's go home, let's pull up the next accident. They totally missed the point that all the cylinders are above 60 psi, so even by that guidance, it was fine. They totally missed that. The real reason why the engine failed, didn't even bother investigating it, didn't occur to them, and then how that information might, I think that is a loss because that information might prevent a future failure that other folks might experience and crash. And I think that's a big important thing. To be blunt, I have to call out that position as incorrect and unfounded. Too bad they didn't do their research and find the FAA-approved service bulletin from Continental that was put out years ago, which says the differential pressures of less than 60 psi do not mean the engine is not putting out full power at operating temperatures and RPM. Okay, important point there. To judge that correctly, they require the use of a standard orifice to measure airflow rates at ambient temperatures and pressures. In other words, you take the leak down rate at this temperature and pressure and see if it works. Okay, what that number is, and a lot of times I've seen 42 psi. And if the cylinder leak down is less than the master orifice number, then the cylinder should be removed and repaired, not prior to. Continental builds a little bit of a loose engine compared to Lycoming. In short, I don't think they're correct at all. They missed important details on quite a few counts. And the mechanical state of the engine and the pilot, I think, that are big issues. The pilot actions are big issues here. The real truth is that the pilot disregarded the standard reactions to a serious emergency, which is to land as soon as possible. A simple right turn to downwind on 1-2 right would have had him on the ground in minutes, seconds after the problem. He would have been alive. He didn't do that. That's a huge mistake. I'm sorry to be blunt like that, but I think it's a foot stomper we all have to pay attention to. The pilot did not declare an emergency or treat the situation as seriously as he should have. Please don't make that mistake. Don't overfly possible divert fields because it may be inconvenient or bring attention to you. You know, if you get in too short of a field, truck the airplane out. Even that is going to be a better choice than the alternative here. I could go on, but I think you get the idea. You're the pilot in command. Make good conservative decisions for yourself and your passengers. Convenience is not a factor in your decision making here. Fly the airplane, declare the emergency, land as soon as possible. Well, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on FlyWire.